I realized I had made a mistake the moment his father stood up from the table. Not shouted, not angry, just stood up slowly as if his legs no longer trusted him. He stared at me like he was looking at a stranger who had been sitting in his house all along. A Navy admiral. That was the word still echoing in his head. And mine. But that moment came much later, after the drive, after the smiles, after the first small comments that seemed harmless at the time. Before that moment, I was just a woman walking into a dining room with a bottle of wine in my hand, trying to make a good first impression. Mark had always thought I was a normal officer. That part wasn't exactly a lie. I did wear the uniform. I did go to base every morning. I did talk about logistics, schedules, meetings, and long hours. I just never used my full title. I never said the word admiral. Not once in the 3 years we had been together. It wasn't a game. And it wasn't manipulation. At least not in the way people might think. It was easier this way. In the Navy, your rank walks into a room before you do. Conversations change. People adjust their tone. Some become nervous. Some become eager. Some become resentful. Very few stay the same. I had spent most of my adult life being treated as a position instead of a person. With Mark, I wanted something different. He met me when I was in civilian clothes, standing in line at a small bookstore near the base. We talked about history, not careers. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into weekends. And somewhere along the way, he decided I worked somewhere in the Navy. He never asked for details, and I never volunteered them. By the time he proposed, it felt too late to suddenly say, "By the way, I'm a rear admiral." So I stayed quiet. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to know who loved me without the uniform. When he invited me to dinner with his parents, I didn't hesitate. "I think they'll like you," he said. "They're simple people, traditional." I smiled. That's fine. What I didn't say was that I was curious. Not about whether they would like me, but about how they would treat me if they thought I was nobody. Mark grew up in a small town about 2 hours from the base, the kind of place with one main street, 2 churches, and a diner that had been open since the 1950s. His parents still lived in the same house he grew up in. White siding, neatly trimmed lawn, a flagpole in the front yard. An American flag, and beneath it a smaller one, Navy. That detail caught my eye when we pulled into the driveway. "You never told me your dad was Navy," I said. "He wasn't," Mark replied, "but he always admired it, says it stands for discipline." I nodded. Discipline. That word had followed me my entire life. We walked up to the door. Mark rang the bell. I adjusted my coat and held the wine tighter than I needed to. His mother opened the door first. She was polite, warm smile, quick hug, the kind of woman who used the word dear without irony. His father stood behind her, tall, broad shoulders, gray hair, firm handshake. "So you're the Navy girl," he said. "Yes, sir," I replied. He nodded once, already making conclusions. Inside the house smelled like roast chicken and lemon cleaner, family photos on the walls, graduation portraits, football trophies, a framed photo of Mark in a high school uniform. No photos of me, no reason there should be. We sat down in the living room. Small talk, weather, traffic, the drive. Then came the question I knew would arrive eventually. "So what do you do in the Navy?" his father asked. I took a breath. "I work in logistics." He smiled. "Paperwork, then." I smiled back, something like that. That was the moment the room shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, but subtly. Like a decision had been made. Dinner was served exactly on time. His mother placed the plates in front of everyone except me. She handed me the serving spoon instead. "Would you mind helping pass these?" she said. I didn't mind. I stood up and did it. His father talked about his retirement, about how hard he'd worked, about how young people these days didn't understand real labor. Mark laughed politely. Then came the neighbor's children. Tom's daughter just became a lawyer. Lisa's son bought his first house at 29. Good careers, real careers. I nodded and ate quietly. No one asked about my achievements. No one seemed curious anymore. His mother asked if I planned to keep working after marriage. "Well," she said, lowering her voice, "a man needs support." I thought about the thousands of sailors who reported to me every morning. I thought about the ships, the bases, the decisions that affected real lives. And I smiled again. "I like my work," I said. She nodded, but her eyes had already moved on. Mark didn't interrupt. He didn't defend me. not because he agreed with them, but because he had grown up in this environment. Silence was normal here. You didn't challenge your parents at the table. I understood that. Still, something inside me tightened. Not anger. Just clarity. This was how they treated someone they believed had no power. No title. No importance. And they were being polite. That was the part that stayed with me. Halfway through dinner, his father leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me. "So what's your real position?" he asked. "In the Navy, I mean." I met his eyes, calmly. "I'm responsible for fleet logistics in the Pacific," I said. He frowned. "That's a lot of responsibility for paperwork." "It's not paperwork," I replied. "It's operations." He laughed lightly. "Sure it is." I paused, just long enough to feel the weight of the moment. "My rank is Rear Admiral," I said. The fork stopped midair. Mark turned toward me. His mother blinked twice. His father stared. For a second, no one spoke. Then he smiled, very funny. I reached into my bag and placed my military ID on the table, not dramatically, just gently. The way you place down a document you've handled your entire life. He picked it up. "Read it." "Read it again." Then he pulled out his phone. He searched the words, and slowly, very slowly, he stood up from his chair. That was the moment I realized the experiment was over, and the truth had just walked into the room. No one spoke for a full 10 seconds after his father stood up. It doesn't sound like much, but when 4 people are sitting at a dinner table and all you can hear is the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a kitchen clock, 10 seconds feels very long. Mark was the first to move. He reached for my hand almost instinctively, like he was trying to confirm that I was still real. You're serious?" he asked. I nodded, yes. His mother looked from me to her husband and back again, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and embarrassment. His father finally sat back down slower than before. "Well," he said quietly, "I'll be damned." That was the moment the atmosphere changed. Not into anger, not into conflict. Into something worse. Awkward respect. Suddenly everyone became very polite. His mother brought out a different set of napkins, the cloth ones, the ones she had clearly been saving. His father pushed my chair in when I stood up to refill my water. "Please let me," he said, using a tone he hadn't used with me all evening. Mark looked like he was trying to catch up with a train that had already left the station. "So you're really an admiral," he said again quietly this time. "Yes. And you're in charge of how many people?" "Several thousand," I replied. No one laughed. The same people who had just been discussing whether I would quit my job after marriage were now sitting across from someone who made decisions that affected entire naval regions. Nothing about me had changed, but everything about how they saw me had. That difference sat heavily in my chest. His father cleared his throat. I thought... He didn't finish the sentence. "I understand," I said gently. "Most people do." His mother leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell us?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because the real answer was uncomfortable. Because I wanted to be treated like a person, I said, not a position. No one knew how to respond to that. Mark looked down at his plate. "I didn't know either," he said. "Not like this." "I never lied to you," I replied. "You never asked." That wasn't meant as a defense, just a fact. The silence returned, but this time it was heavier. Different. Dinner resumed, but the tone was gone. Every question now sounded like an interview. "How long have you been in? Where were you stationed before? Do you travel often?" They weren't rude. In fact, they were trying very hard to be respectful. Too hard. The kind of respect that feels more like fear. His father called me ma'am twice before I asked him to please stop. "I'm just Sarah," I said, "at least tonight." He nodded but didn't seem convinced. Mark barely ate. He kept glancing at me like he was seeing a stranger. I wondered what he was feeling. Pride, shocked, doubt, or something else entirely. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. After dessert, his mother suggested we move to the living room. She brought out coffee, biscuits, the good cups this time. His father sat across from me, posture straighter than before. "You must be very disciplined," he said, "to reach a rank like that." "Yes," I replied, "but I've also had help, mentors, teams." He nodded slowly. "I always admired the Navy. Never thought I'd meet someone so high up." High up. The words landed strangely. Like I had climbed above him. Above them. That wasn't how I saw it. But I could tell that was how he felt. And that was the problem. Mark finally spoke again. "So why me?" he asked. The room went quiet. I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "I mean, I'm just a project manager. I don't even make half of what you probably do." I smiled sadly. "I never asked about your salary." "That's not the point," he said. "It is," I replied softly. "It's exactly the point." His parents watched us carefully now like spectators. "I chose you because you listened to me," I continued. "Because you treated me well when you thought I was ordinary." Mark swallowed. "But I didn't know who you really were." I met his eyes. "You knew who I was. You just didn't know my title." There was a difference. A very important one. His father stood up again, this time with effort. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for earlier." I nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated. "We may have underestimated you." I didn't respond immediately. Not because I wanted to make a point, but because I was choosing my words carefully. "You didn't underestimate me," I said finally. "You treated me exactly the way you thought was appropriate." His face tightened. "That's what worries me." No one spoke after that. Not for a while. The truth had settled into the room like dust. Quiet, unavoidable. I realized something then. This dinner had answered the question I came for. Not about whether they respected rank, but about how they treated someone without it. And the answer wasn't cruel. But it wasn't kind either. When Mark and I finally stood to leave, his mother hugged me tightly. "You're welcome here anytime," she said. I believed her. But I also knew it wasn't the same welcome as before. It came with expectations now. With awareness. With hierarchy. In the car, Mark didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, hands on the steering wheel. "I don't know how to feel," he said. I nodded. "That makes two of us." He looked at me. "Are you angry?" "No," I said. "I'm disappointed." He flinched slightly. "Not in you," I added. "In the situation." He didn't respond. The town lights passed quietly as we drove back. I watched them through the window and thought about something I had learned long ago in the Navy. Power doesn't change who people are. It reveals it. And tonight I had seen enough to know that the real test wasn't over yet. The next morning, Mark left early for work. He kissed my forehead like he always did, but there was a hesitation in it, a carefulness that hadn't been there before. As if he was touching something fragile he didn't fully understand yet. I stayed in the apartment alone, sitting at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold. Nothing dramatic had happened. No shouting, no insults, no doors slammed. And yet something fundamental had shifted. The dinner replayed itself in my mind, not in the loud moments, but in the quiet ones. The way his mother had handed me the serving spoon, the way his father had talked about real careers, the way Mark had smiled and stayed silent. It wasn't cruelty. It was something more subtle. Assumption. Later that afternoon, Mark called. "My mom invited us for lunch tomorrow," he said. I paused. "Why?" He hesitated. "I think she wants to clear the air." I agreed. Not because I wanted another explanation, but because I wanted to see if anything had actually changed. The lunch was at a small diner near their house. Same one Mark had talked about growing up. Vinyl booths, faded menu, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed since the Reagan administration. We arrived a few minutes early. His parents were already seated. This time his mother stood up immediately. "Sarah, dear," she said warmly, "please sit here. Best spot." She pointed to the corner seat, the one facing the window. His father nodded respectfully. "We're glad you came." They spoke to me differently now. Slower, more careful, almost rehearsed. The waitress came. "What can I get you, hon?" Before I could answer, his mother said, "She'll have whatever she wants." I smiled politely. "Coffee is fine." The waitress nodded and left. Mark watched the exchange quietly. Conversation began awkwardly. His father asked about my career again, but this time in admiration. "You must have worked very hard to get where you are." "Yes," I replied, "but everyone in the service does." His mother asked about my parents. "They must be very proud." "They are," I said, "but they raised me to believe work is just one part of life." That was true. My parents never cared about titles, they cared about character. That difference felt more noticeable now than ever. At one point, his father leaned forward. "I hope you didn't think we were disrespectful last night." I met his eyes. "I didn't think you were trying to be." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I think you treated me the way you treat people you don't expect much from," I said gently. The table went quiet. Mark shifted in his seat. His mother looked uncomfortable. "That's not fair," his father said. "We were polite." "Yes," I replied. "You were." He waited for more. "Polite isn't the same as respectful." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I wasn't attacking him. I was explaining something he had never been forced to consider. After lunch, Mark and I walked outside while his parents stayed behind to pay. The air was cool, quiet, small-town quiet. "I didn't realize they were like that," Mark said. "Like what?" He thought for a moment. "So focused on success." I nodded. "They measure people by outcomes, not intentions." He sighed. "I guess I do that too sometimes." I looked at him. "Do you?" He hesitated. That hesitation answered the question better than any words could. That evening I received an email from one of my junior officers. A logistics issue had escalated, a shipment delay affecting multiple units. I spent 2 hours on the phone coordinating adjustments. Mark watched from the couch. When I finished, he said quietly, "You really do carry a lot." I smiled. "I always have." He looked at me. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I considered the question. "Because I wanted you to know me before you knew my power." He nodded slowly. "I think I understand that now," he said. But I wasn't sure he really did. Understanding takes time. And discomfort. The next few days were strangely calm. Mark's parents sent messages, friendly, respectful. His mother asked if I preferred tea or coffee when visiting. His father shared articles about naval operations. They were trying. But I noticed something important. They were trying because they knew my rank, not because they had re-evaluated how they treated people in general. That distinction stayed with me. It wasn't personal anymore. It was educational. One evening, Mark asked me something that caught me off guard. "If you had really been nobody," he said, "do you think they would have liked you?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about the dinner, about the comments, about the assumptions. "I think they would have tolerated me," I said. He frowned. "That's different." "Yes." He looked down. "And would that have been enough for you?" "No," I said quietly. He nodded slowly. That was the first honest moment we'd had since the dinner. Later that night I lay awake. Not angry. Not hurt. Just thoughtful. I realized that what I had witnessed wasn't a flaw unique to Mark's family. It was something deeply American. We admire effort, but we worship outcome. We praise humility, but we listen to power. We say everyone deserves respect, but we practice it selectively. I had spent my career surrounded by people who saluted titles. That night I had seen what happens when the title disappears. And I had learned something uncomfortable. The difference between being valued and being tolerated is smaller than most people think. But it means everything to the person standing on the receiving end. The next morning, Mark told me his parents wanted to invite me to a church event. "A community dinner," he said. "They think you'd be a good influence." I smiled slightly. "A good influence on what?" He hesitated. "On the younger families?" I understood what he meant. They wanted to showcase me. Not as Sarah, but as an example. A success story. A symbol. I declined politely. "Why?" Mark asked. "Because I don't want to be inspirational," I said. "I want to be normal." He didn't know how to respond to that. By the end of the week, I felt something settle inside me. Not resentment. Not bitterness. Just clarity. This wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. I had walked into that house as nobody, and been treated accordingly. Now that they knew who I was, everything had changed. But the way they treated nobody hadn't. And that more than anything told me the truth about the situation. Not about them, but about what I needed from the people I chose to keep in my life. Respect that didn't depend on titles. Love that didn't require proof. And a future that didn't start with hierarchy. It was time to find out whether Mark could offer that. The real question came 3 days later in a place that had nothing to do with his parents. We were sitting in my car outside a grocery store, the kind with faded signs and shopping carts that never quite rolled straight. Mark had just finished loading bags into the trunk, and I was checking my phone for messages from the base. He didn't start the engine. He just sat there staring at the steering wheel. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I looked at him. Of course. He took a breath. "Are you actually happy with me?" The question surprised me. Not because it was unreasonable, but because it was honest. "Yes," I said, "I am." He nodded slowly. "But would you still be happy if I was less..." "Less what?" "Less impressive," he said. "Less successful, less enough." I understood what he was really asking. Would I love him if the roles were reversed? If he were the nobody? I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to choose my words carefully. "I didn't choose you because of your career," I said. "I chose you because of how you treated me before any of this." He looked at me, and now I'm watching," I replied gently. He smiled weakly. "That sounds like a test." "It's not," I said. "It's a conversation." He nodded. But I could see the discomfort behind his eyes. That evening, Mark told me his father wanted to speak to me privately. Not at their house. Not over dinner. At a small park near the river. I agreed. Curiosity is a difficult habit to break. His father arrived early, sitting on a bench with his hands folded. No phone, no newspaper. Just waiting. "Thank you for meeting me," he said when I approached. "Of course," I replied. We sat in silence for a moment, watching ducks drift lazily across the water. "I've been thinking about our dinner," he said finally. "So have I." He sighed. I didn't like the man I saw in myself that night. I turned toward him. "That's rare," I said quietly. "Most people don't admit that." He nodded. I realized something uncomfortable. I've spent my whole life judging people by what they produce, what they earn, what they become. I didn't interrupt. "And when I thought you were just average," he continued, "I didn't bother getting to know you." I let the words settle. "That's true," I said calmly. He winced slightly. "It's not something I'm proud of." "Awareness is a start," I replied, "but it doesn't change what already happened." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for honesty." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About whether my son is good enough for you." The question caught me off guard. Not because it was offensive, but because it revealed something deeper. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about hierarchy. About whether he believed his son had earned someone like me. "Mark doesn't need to be good enough for my rank," I said. "He needs to be good enough for me." He nodded slowly. "And is he?" I paused. Not because I wanted to punish Mark, but because the truth wasn't simple. "He's learning," I said, "just like you are." The man exhaled. "That may not be enough," he said. "It might be," I replied, "if he's willing to learn the right things." Later that night, Mark asked me what his father had said. I told him the truth. All of it. Yes. He sat on the couch, hands clasped together. "So even my dad thinks I'm beneath you?" I shook my head. "He thinks in rankings, not relationships." "That doesn't make it better," he said. "No," I agreed, "it just makes it clearer." Mark stood up and paced the room. "I never wanted to be compared to you," he said. "I just wanted to be your partner." "Then act like it," I said softly. He stopped. "What does that mean?" "It means standing beside me when people underestimate me," I replied, "not behind them." He looked at me, eyes searching. "You think I failed you at dinner?" "I think you stayed comfortable," I said. "And comfort is a choice." He didn't argue. That silence meant more than any apology. The next weekend, we attended a small family gathering at his cousin's house. Nothing formal. Barbecue, folding chairs, children running around. I wore jeans and a simple blouse. No jewelry. No uniform. No clues. Mark introduced me as his fiancé. Nothing more. His relatives were friendly but curious. "What do you do?" one of them asked. "I work for the Navy," I replied. "Office job?" "Yes," I said. They nodded and moved on. The same pattern repeated. Mild interest, then polite distance. Mark watched closely this time. He noticed the shift. The lack of curiosity. The assumptions. Later, as we sat in the car, he said quietly, "They didn't even ask your last name." "No," I said, "they didn't." He frowned. "They didn't try to know you." I smiled slightly. "That's what it feels like." He looked out the window. "I think I've been blind," he said. Most people are, I replied, until it happens to someone they love. He nodded slowly. For the first time since the dinner, I felt something real change. Not in how others saw me, but in how Mark saw the world. That night, Mark did something small but meaningful. He posted a photo of us together on social media. Not tagged with my title. Not bragging. Just a simple caption. Proud of the woman I'm building a life with. No rank, no explanation. Just me. I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't a grand gesture. But it was honest. And sometimes honesty is the hardest thing to achieve. The truth is, the biggest reveal wasn't my rank. It was the way people reacted when they thought it didn't exist. And the biggest lesson wasn't for them. It was for me. I had spent years hiding my title to protect myself from being treated differently. But now I saw the deeper truth. It wasn't my job to control how people behaved. It was my job to notice. And choose accordingly. The question had changed everything. Not who am I to them, but who are they when they think I am nobody? That answer mattered more than any uniform ever could. The first real sign came from his mother. Not with words. With gifts. A small box arrived at our apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, addressed in careful handwriting. Inside was a silk scarf and a handwritten note. Saw this and thought of you. Hope you're well. Love, Mom. Mark watched me read it. That's new, he said. I nodded. Yes, it is. Before the dinner, his mother had never sent me anything. Not a card, not a message, not even a text. Now she was signing notes with love. I placed the scarf back in the box. It wasn't the gift that unsettled me. It was the timing. The next week, his father called. Not Mark. Me. Sarah, he said, clearing his throat. Your mother-in-law here. We weren't married. I was wondering if you'd like to join me for lunch sometime, he continued. Just the two of us. I hesitated. Why? I'd like to learn more about your experiences. He meant my career, not my childhood, not my values, not my fears, my experiences, the ones that came with a title. I agreed. Again, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. Lunch was at a quiet restaurant near the courthouse. White tablecloths, soft music, the kind of place where people spoke carefully. His father arrived early and stood up when I entered. He pulled out my chair. He ordered my meal for me after asking what I preferred. He spoke slowly, respectfully, almost formally. This was the same man who had joked about paperwork days earlier. Now he asked about command structures, leadership challenges, strategic decisions. He leaned in as I spoke, nodding with genuine interest. At one point, he said something that finally made it clear. I didn't realize someone like you could be so normal. I smiled politely. What did you expect? He thought for a moment, someone intimidating. I looked at him calmly. I was. You just didn't notice. He didn't laugh. He understood. When I returned home, Mark was sitting on the couch. How was it, he asked. Educational, I replied. For him or for you? For both of us, I said. He frowned. He was respectful, wasn't he? Yes. And that bothers you? No, I said. What bothers me is that respect needed a reason. Mark sat quietly. He never treated you badly before, he said. No, I replied, but he didn't treat me meaningfully either. There was a difference. Mark leaned back. They're trying, he said. I know, I replied, but trying to change behavior is easier than changing belief. He nodded slowly. The invitations kept coming. Community dinners, charity events, church functions. Always polite. Always warm. Always framed around my presence. She'd be a wonderful example. People would love to hear her story. It would mean so much to the younger families. I became a symbol, not a person. Mark noticed it too. They talk about you like you're a trophy, he said one night. I smiled faintly. They always did. They just didn't know it before. One evening, Mark finally confronted his parents. Not angrily, but firmly. He told them he felt like they were treating me differently. Of course we are, his mother said. She's special. She was always special, Mark replied. You just didn't see it. His father was quiet. That silence said everything. The next time I visited their house, I paid close attention. His mother offered me tea in her best cups. His father asked my opinion on current affairs. They laughed at my jokes, but something felt artificial. carefully constructed. As if they were afraid of making a mistake. I missed the honesty. Even if it hadn't been flattering. Later that night, Mark and I sat in bed. "Do you feel like they're trying to impress you?" he asked. "No," I said. "They're trying to earn me." "Isn't that the same thing?" "No," I replied. "One is about connection, the other is about status." He looked thoughtful. "I think I'm starting to understand what you meant," he said. "About being treated like nobody." "It's not about being ignored," I said. "It's about being invisible." He nodded slowly. The truth was, the shift in behavior wasn't comforting. It was unsettling. Because it revealed something fundamental. Their kindness now was conditional. It depended on information, on perception, on power. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. One afternoon I received another package from his mother. Inside was a framed article about a female admiral. "Thought you'd appreciate this," the note said. I stared at it for a long time. Then I placed it in a drawer. Not out of anger, out of distance. That evening I said something to Mark that surprised both of us. "I miss when your parents didn't care who I was." He blinked. "You miss being underestimated?" "No," I replied. "I miss being unmeasured." He smiled faintly. "That sounds lonely." "It is," I said, "but it's honest." The shift in behavior had taught me something important. People don't reveal who they are when they're impressed. They reveal who they are when they're indifferent. And the way someone treats you when they think you don't matter, that's the truest version of their character. Not the polished one. Not the respectful one. The unguarded one. That was the version I couldn't forget. And it was the version I now had to decide whether I could live with. The real confrontation didn't happen in a dramatic way. There was no raised voice, no slammed door, no final speech. It happened quietly on a Sunday afternoon while we were folding laundry. Mark held one of my uniforms in his hands, smoothing the sleeves like he always did. He had started doing that after the dinner, treating the fabric with a kind of careful respect that made me uncomfortable. "You know," he said, "not looking at me sometimes I forget that this is just clothing." I paused. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I mean, when I look at this I don't see you. I see everything you represent." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "That's exactly what I've been afraid of," I said. He finally met my eyes. "Is that bad?" "Yes," I replied. "If you stop seeing me, it is." He looked confused. "I'm proud of you." "I know," I said, "but pride and presence aren't the same thing." He frowned slightly. "I don't understand." "Then let me explain it plainly," I said. "I don't want to be admired. I want to be known." He stayed quiet. "I don't want to walk into rooms and change the air," I continued. "I want to walk into rooms and still be invisible to power." "That's impossible," he said. "No," I replied. "It's rare, but it's not impossible." That evening I finally said the question I had been avoiding. "Mark, would you still have proposed if I worked at a grocery store?" He blinked. "What kind of question is that?" "A real one." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence was enough. Not because his answer was wrong, but because it wasn't immediate. He had to think. And love at its core should not require calculation. "I think so," he said finally. Think. Not know? That difference settled heavily between us. We sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The sun moved slowly across the floor. "I don't know how to compete with you," he said quietly. "You're not supposed to," I replied. "You're supposed to walk beside me." He rubbed his hands together nervously. "But everyone looks at you like you're above us." "I'm not above anyone," I said. "I just wear a different uniform." "But the world doesn't see it that way." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't." That was the heart of the problem. Not his parents. Not his town. Not even him. The world had taught him that value comes from rank, from income, from achievement. And I had become the embodiment of that lesson, whether I wanted to or not. The next day I invited Mark to visit the base. Not the offices, not the conference rooms, the mess hall, the training grounds, the places where people ate, joked, complained, and waited. I introduced him to junior sailors, to mechanics, to supply clerks, to people who worked just as hard as I did but would never make headlines. "These are the people I work for," I said. He watched them carefully. No salutes. No formalities. Just people. At lunch, one of them asked him, "So how'd you meet the boss?" Mark smiled awkwardly. "Bookstore." The sailor laughed. Figures. She never goes anywhere important. I smiled. That was the version of me I missed. The one who existed without ceremony. On the drive home, Mark was quiet. I didn't expect that, he said. Expect what? For it to feel so normal. I nodded. That's what I've been trying to protect. He sighed. I think I understand now. But again, I wasn't sure. Understanding something intellectually and living it emotionally are two different things. 2 nights later, Mark finally said what I had been waiting to hear. I don't want to be with you because of what you are. I looked at him. Then why do you want to be with me? Because you're steady, he said. Because you listen. Because you don't make me feel small. I smiled faintly. I never wanted to. He swallowed. But sometimes I make myself feel small around you. That's not my responsibility, I said gently, but it is my concern. He nodded slowly. I think I need time, he said, to unlearn some things. So do I replied. We didn't break up. But we didn't move forward either. We chose something harder. We chose honesty. The real confrontation wasn't about my rank. It was about his identity. About whether he could stand in a world where his partner was publicly powerful without shrinking himself. About whether I could love someone who was still learning how to do that. There was no villain in that story. Just 2 people raised in a system that taught them different definitions of worth. And now we had to decide whether we could build a new one together. Not based on hierarchy. Not based on admiration. But on mutual visibility. The kind where neither person disappears behind the other. That was the real test. And it wasn't over yet. We didn't speak for 2 days after that conversation. Not because we were angry, but because we were both thinking. Mark stayed at a friend's place the first night. I stayed in the apartment, sitting on the same couch where we had once planned vacations and argued about paint colors for a house we didn't own yet. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt even in combat zones. Uncertainty. Not about my career, not about my future, but about love. On the 3rd morning, there was a knock on the door. Not loud. Not urgent. Just steady. I opened it and saw Mark standing there holding 2 coffees. I didn't know what you drink anymore, he said, so I got both. I smiled faintly and stepped aside. We sat at the small kitchen table again, the same place where I had asked him if he would love me without my title. This time he spoke first. I went to see my parents yesterday, he said. I nodded. How did that go? I told them I wasn't sure about getting married right now. I looked at him surprised. They thought I was crazy, he continued. My dad said I'd be throwing away the best opportunity of my life. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? Mark took a breath. I said I didn't want to marry an opportunity. I wanted to marry a person. My chest tightened slightly. They didn't understand, he added, but I think I finally did.